This text is probably one of the favorite texts that I enjoy after Christmas. The bringing of the baby Jesus to the temple for both his dedication, as the Jews were always required to bring their firstborn, particularly the firstborn son, to the temple. And the idea was the firstborn son belonged to God, and if you wanted to keep your son, you were supposed to give a nice offering, whatever you could afford. And of course, Mary had to undergo the rites of ritual purification, having had childbirth. The Jewish laws don't really like bodily fluids, so anytime there's any issue with bodily fluids, then one has to be cleansed and prepared to visit the temple. So this is just a great story of Anna and Simeon, two older people who basically lived their lives serving God, fasting and praying, and living in the temple. And when you see that beautiful picture that Carol put on the front of the bulletin, it just evokes the feeling that I've had all week thinking about the sermon, the joy of holding and seeing a brand new baby. If you're a parent, you've experienced that with your own children. Some of you are grandparents, and I'm told that the grandparent experience is even more intense. I've seen that in my own parents, that there's just some little bit of a difference there when one becomes a grandmother. When Mitchell was born, we were serving a disciples church, my home church in Indianapolis, and Walter was the minister of music. This church is about maybe 3,000 members. The church choir had gone to Memphis, and I had gestational diabetes, so I was going to the doctor every week, and the day that they left, I was having some premature contractions. And so we put him on the bus, and I had taken him to the church where the bus, they rolled off. There were no cell phones in these days, so it was hard. He called every stop they made. He called the home phone or my office and left a message. As it turned out, they were to get back Monday morning, the 27th, which wound up being Mitchell's birthday. My water broke on Sunday night around midnight. I called my mom, who dashed me off to the hospital. Walter calls from the road on their way back, gets no answer, starts calling the hospital. By the time Mitchell was born, about 12 hours later, he was born 10:51 p.m., there had been literally hundreds of phone calls made to the maternity ward at IU Medical Center in Indianapolis. The nurses came in and said, "What do you people do?" We have never gotten so many phone calls about a baby. Everyone is calling to find out if the Owens baby has been born yet. It was just, and they had no idea the dynamics of this large church family. One of the leaders of the church and that young couple was having a baby. So we got all kinds of visitors floating in. We were flooded with stuffed animals, flowers, toys, you name it, we had it. And people came to see little Mitchell as though he were some sort of rock star celebrity. He was just a church baby, but he was our baby. People were coming by from the hospital wanting to know, we want to see the baby that everybody's coming to visit. And we're like, this is just it was such a bizarre, unreal experience. To this day, when Mitchell goes home to Indianapolis, to our home church, and we left, he was 7 years old, people will say, we remember the weekend you were born. Walter flew off the bus, and they took him off to the hospital, and everyone was nervous, and we all remember because the choir was coming back from Memphis. That's just a little snippet of the anticipation that the people of Israel had for the Messiah. The text tells us that Simeon, in his old age, had been told that he would not see death until he was allowed to see the Christ child, the Messiah. Only the Holy Spirit surely could have told him who this baby was. Mary and Joseph weren't members of a 3,000-member synagogue. They had no huge family. They were simply coming to the temple to do what the law required them to do. One, to dedicate their baby back to God, and secondly, so that Mary could undergo her ritual purification. There was no announcement more broadly. The events that we've heard about with Herod and the wise men, with the shepherds and the angels, were actually not public announcements. They were announcements to certain people in certain circumstances And we don't really know if and how word would have spread at this point. We just have to trust that these people who devoted their lives to God were hearing from the Spirit of God when that baby was placed in their arms and when that baby was revealed to them. So if you can imagine the excitement of your own baby or of your own grandchildren or even the excitement of a church when their minister of music had his first child, imagine the feeling that Simeon had. You know, people say all the time, I can die now, right? When the most wonderful thing has happened to you, people are like, okay, I can die now, I'm ready to go. We say that, it's serious hyperbole, but we say that when something phenomenal has happened. That really kind of comes back to these lines from Simeon. Your servant can now go in peace because I've lived to see the wonderful promise that you have given to me. There's so many ideas that we have about what the Jewish people thought about the Messiah, what they knew and what they anticipated. What we do know is that they had many texts. We've been reading them during Advent, the wonderful scriptures in Isaiah. Unto us a child is born, unto us a son is given. Isaiah 7:14, behold, a virgin will conceive and bear a son and shall call his name Emmanuel. But we also have the heritage of the Jews from the covenant that goes all the way back to Abraham. When Abraham was called out of the town of Ur of the Chaldees and told to go to a land that God would lead him, and that God would make his descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky, as numerous as the sands on the beach, and through him all the nations of the earth would be blessed. And the Jews also knew that God had made a covenant with David when he became king of Israel, that the throne of Israel would never leave his line of descendants. And we also know this fractured history of the Assyrians attacking the northern kingdom and the Babylonians attacking the southern kingdom of Israel. The Jews being conquered, carried away, they're now occupied in Rome. How they must have clung to these promises. And here Simeon stands in the temple. It had to have been at least in the court of women, because Mary was able to stand in that place. The women could only go so far into these inner portions of the temple. But I wonder if those memories of those texts came to his mind. I wonder what he thought. I wonder how he thought he should respond to this profound moment. We have Anna, who is a woman who has lived most of her life. It's kind of hard to calculate how old she is. It sounds like she's 84. I was looking at some commentaries that said it could have been that she's been a widow for 84 years, which would have made her really old. So I'm not sure I'm quite with that math. But Anna has lived in the temple for years, fasting and praying and thinking about God. So we get this exciting news, this news that is promised to us in the scripture and texts that are real and powerful to us. I think the only thing that comes close to that for us as Christians is the second return of Christ. And it's hard to even know when or how. Over the years, there have been lots of people who've made interesting calculations as to when the second coming might occur. We all know that during the whole Y2K business, everybody thought the world was going to end. There were people that were packing up and selling all their worldly possessions, thinking that the world was coming to an end. But we don't necessarily have an analogous situation to this powerful message. But we have two very different responses. And each of these responses have to do with these individuals' personal experiences. Simeon, we're told, is the priest who follows Zechariah. Zechariah is the father of John the Baptist. So Simeon has prominence and place in the temple. It would have been an important thing for Simeon to be the one to hold your baby, as opposed to just one of the normal priests. So you got the big guy, the chief priest, holding your child, doing this important dedication in the temple. God has kept his promise and allowed him to see the Messiah. I can die in peace, he says. There is no phoning it in for a moment like this. There is no substitute for Simeon's experience of holding in his arms the incarnation of God's promise, the child who is going to deliver Israel. How they do not know, when they do not know. All Simeon knows is that this is what God was talking about. and I believe that in my arms I am holding God's very promised gift. Simeon's response is probably the response that many of you have when something amazing happens to you. Some wonderful testimony or joy. You might share your joy in church, but many of us are not really we're not oversharers, some of us. I'm the first one to tell you when something exciting has happened to me. Some of us will just maybe share it with a friend. Some of you may not even share those joys or those victories in worship or with other people at church. You may share it with family and closest friends. There have been times when people have shared with me exciting things that have happened with their family, but then they don't necessarily share that with the broader community. Simeon shared his excitement and the knowledge that he knew what was happening with Mary, but he does it in a very priestly way, almost a scary way, if you think about what he says ultimately. He tells her that this is what he calls the consolation of Israel. This baby is what we've been waiting for. And all the things that prophecy has told us will happen are going to happen. But he says to Mary that a sword will pierce her heart also. I would not want to hear that at my child's baby dedication, that something bad was also going to happen. We don't know how Mary responds. Later in that chapter, in the text, it does say that she thinks about these things. She ponders in her heart. If you can imagine this young couple, all they've heard are some messages from the angels, and then to have people with major religious credibility coming to tell you that they don't refer to the angel, but for Simeon to say, this is the child that we've all been waiting for. This child will be important to Israel. And something, you'll be hurt by this process, but this baby will be important to Israel. Anna, who probably as a woman has a different way of expressing herself, has a completely different response. She's been fasting and praying and probably very low-key in the temple. As a woman, she wouldn't have been given a leadership responsibility. She would have certainly been in a servant kind of role, taking care of the basic things at the temple, probably in her own space where women were allowed to be, giving her life to taking care of the priests and to taking care of the temple. And we wonder why this woman has this particular response. She goes out and starts talking to people about what's happening with the baby. She doesn't just talk to Mary and Joseph. She goes out and starts talking to other people who are in the temple. I think that's a very womanly thing to do. Haven't you seen the beautiful baby? God has responded. God has fulfilled his promise. We have just laid hands on the Messiah. We have seen him. It's also not surprising that a woman is doing this in Luke's gospel, because Luke is the gospel where Jesus talks to women, where Jesus befriends women. It's in Luke that we hear about the woman at the Samaritan well. It's in Luke where we hear about the woman who brings a special ointment to anoint Jesus' feet with her hair. Luke has a perspective on Jesus that says that Jesus is there for the least, the last, and the lost, and that Jesus embraces not only the fellowship of women, but the leadership of women throughout his gospel. Two very interesting and different responses. One of an older, pious priest, excuse me, who simply wants to offer his praise and say, God, thank you. You've done this great thing. We see it. And he offers words of prophetic wisdom to the couple. And then a woman, devout, given her whole life to living and taking care of the temple, to fasting and prayer. And her response is more emotional, more ebullient, more, isn't this exciting? Let's go share with the people who are here to worship. Sometimes when we have experiences that are powerful, we can't find the words to express exactly what we want to say. We can't find the words to express exactly what we've seen, or more importantly, what we felt. But when experiences happen to you, you do have a response. When we think of this word testimony, depending upon the church tradition you've grown up in, it may mean something, it may not mean something to you. Fe Esperanza, whenever we worship with them, their period of what we call joys and concerns, they call it testimonies. And it's just a different way of saying that what we're doing is bearing witness to what God has done for us. That's what we're doing when we're sharing our joys and concerns. We're bearing witness to what we have experienced, and sometimes we're bearing witness to what others have experienced. There's nothing like experiencing that baby yourself. You can rejoice for someone else's baby. You can rejoice in someone else's good fortune. And you can even empathize with someone else's sorrow. But what you have experienced personally yourself, that's a story that only you can tell. And the power of first-person testimonies, and it even extends to our legal system. There's something against hearsay evidence, which means that what you say someone else told you doesn't carry as much weight as what you yourself have seen and experienced. And when we think about how we share the good things that God has done for us, when we think about how we can be more effective in being witnesses, some of that work is done by serving others. But sometimes it's just as important to share with your own mouth what God has done for you. To thank God for the goodness, for healing, for financial miracles, for reconciliation, for comfort, for exciting news about your family, things that you have experienced, things that mean something to you. Sometimes someone's heart will be opened when you share your joy, when you share the story of how your concern has been met, when you share how God has brought you through, when people see the look on your face when you tell of the goodness of God in your life. There is no one who can offer that story but you. And you are the one whose heart, whose life has been touched by what God has done. No one can pretend to offer up that same kind of joy. It is you who must share that news. But if you have never had any true experiences, I always like to offer this as a rhetorical question. Maybe God's never done anything for you. Maybe you have nothing to share. I don't know. I cannot imagine in this room that there's a single person who doesn't have something wonderful to share about what God is doing in their lives. Life is not a bowl of candy, box of chocolates, as they say. You get what you get. But there are moments when the goodness of God, when the unbelievable grace of God is so full in our lives that it's hard to imagine how we could not at least offer our own private prayer, perhaps as Simeon does, or perhaps as Anna does, run and talk to people and tell people that we know, even if it's just a friend at work, a friend at church, a family member, or even if it's just something you share with your pastor. The baby you prayed for. Seeing that beautiful baby that we prayed for. We've prayed for other children. We've prayed for people. When we know that people have had exciting and powerful prayers answered, we want to know about those things. And as you look at the prayer requests that are sent out in the bulletin each week and that Karen sends out on email, sometimes we need to come back and say, what did God do in that situation? Did God heal? Sometimes God says no. But when God has answered our prayer, that's a testimony we want to share. Why? Because it encourages others to know that God has answered your prayer. And guess what? If God has answered your prayer, God will answer mine. That good feeling that you have when you've participated in a ministry project. Boy, we were on a high last weekend when we were at Parkway Gardens. That's a joy that just had to be there to be experienced. We can tell you about it, but we have a different experience because we were there. So today, on this last day of the year, what's your first person testimony? What have you experienced this year that you really need to hold on to and remember? Is there a blessing that you've received, something positive that you want people to know about what God has done in your family's life, in your life, in the life of this church, that you think will make a difference to someone, that will offer a sense of hope, a sense of encouragement, a sense of comfort to someone to know that God has moved in this way in my life? Would you do me a favor and close your eyes? And just for a few minutes, I want us to have just a moment of silence, because I think this may be a little more comfortable for some of you. To just give God thanks for at least one thing that you've seen him do in your life this year. Joys. He's brought you comfort during loss. He's bridged the gap financially for you. He has strengthened your physical body when you were sick. He has taken care of your family, allowed you to spend time with family. He's kept this church financially. He's kept this church spiritually. He's brought us all closer together. He's given us new things to do. He's brought wonderful new people to visit and be a part of our community. God loves you. Embrace that first person testimony. You can open your eyes. I hope that in the year that is ahead, we will look for those moments and those opportunities to acknowledge that we have had our own first person experiences. And however you choose to share, remember that God needs you to share, because God needs you to be a witness for what he's done for you, he can do for others. Someone needs to hear your testimony. Whether you were quiet and priestly like Simeon, or enthusiastic and outgoing like Anna, don't keep those testimonies to yourself. Someone else needs to hear them. God bless you, and all the best to all of us for the new year.